Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. What if your organization was sharing powerful and engaging stories? Sound good, right? But what if the stories that were being shared weren't actually connecting with your customers? That doesn't sound good. I'm excited for this upcoming episode because my guests and we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about how you can have more brand alignment and how you could be connecting your leaders to your frontline workers. Today, I am joined by Chris Wallace. Chris is a marketing and customer experience strategist. He is the president of InnerView, and he is also an adjunct marketing professor at Villanova University, and he regularly publishes in outlets including the Harvard Business Review and Forbes. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt, for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
Thanks for your time. I know you're extremely busy, so I want to dive in and really unpack a lot of what you do. And I want to start with talking about decision makers in organizations and the disconnect between what they're thinking regarding story strategy, brand alignment, marketing, and their frontline workers. What do you think one of the disconnects is?
Well, I think that we talk a lot about the kind of the say-do gap. I think that a lot of times organizations have a picture of what they think customers do and how customers behave, whether it's through their market research or customer satisfaction surveys and things like that. But nobody quite knows how customers act the way that your front lines do, right? They're there in the moment. They're interacting with these people. They're seeing them, seeing the behaviors that are sort of in the heat of the moment, if you will. And I think that part of the disconnect comes from just sort of executives not understanding the reality of those moments. What's truly happening? How do those interactions go? And it's hard for the executives to see the world through the eyes of their frontline teams. And what they see is really valuable information, valuable input for executives.
So I love that. And I love you mentioning market research versus what people frontline are experiencing. So I remember a story regarding Barefoot Wine, where one of the things the owners of Barefoot Wine did was they went into the warehouse and they talked to individuals in the warehouse. And one of the things that they recognized was there were so many crates of wine that were being busted. And a lot of these crates, you couldn't tell the difference on what wine it was. So one of the warehouse employees said, why don't we have ours a lot more colorful, something that stands out? And then we're going to make sure that we keep in touch with these warehouse workers so they know when they see this box that's colorful, that's Barefoot Wine. And they actually took care of those boxes more than the other boxes. So there was less damaged goods. So back to your point about market research, they could have done all the market research they want on wine and how people, where they drink and how they like to drink and, the demographics of the drinkers themselves and all these different things. But if they didn't actually connect with their frontline workers, what a huge missed opportunity. So
now, can I give you another example?
Yeah,
Matt?
Absolutely.
So you struck a nerve here, because one of my favorite examples to talk about when you talk about sort of leveraging the power of frontline teams and the influence they can have, I'm using another wine example. I don't know if you're familiar with Yellowtail and sort of the story of how they've grown, an Australian brand, and they went to the States that had state-controlled state liquor boards, where there were state stores, the Virginias, the Pennsylvanias, and they struck a deal with them to send people into their state stores and do sampling and things like that. And they built that brand really on the backs of these ambassadors going into these state stores and driving. So you think about having that person telling the story, telling a convicted story about this brand, and what is, by my understanding, not the greatest wine in the world, has turned into an empire based on sort of that, if you will, hand-to-hand combat and really the strength of those frontline ambassadors. So it just goes to show you that in both instances that the influence that those folks can have, what they see and also what they say, can really influence customers tremendously.
Oh, that's such a good point. And one of the dangers that I see more than ever now, and this is almost horrifying to me that this is actually conversations happening in C-suite rooms, but a lot of leaders are looking at AI technology and thinking that's going to fill the gap. That AI is going to do branding for them. AI is going to do everything, right? And there's such a huge disconnect. So can you speak to that as far as what marketers can learn by reaching out to frontline workers, regardless of AI technology? Because we can't allow robots to know all the ins and outs of our customers. So where might be a disconnect when it comes to AI marketing and frontline?
Well, I'm going to tell you where I think the biggest disconnect is in that whole strategy. The idea that the organization, that the marketing team can come up with the perfect message, and the perfect message is going to resonate with enough customers for you to start making money hand over fist. Okay. The idea that you can market yourself successfully from the outside in, drive enough demand, enough leads or whatever it is to your front door, is not how most organizations work. The only company that I know that truly can do that, is drive enough customers to their door, is Apple, right? Apple can get enough. Literally, they stand at the front door and line up at the door. But for most other companies, it's nuanced. You can pique interest through marketing, and people can show up. But in a lot of cases, in a lot of products, even in the wine that we were just talking about, a lot of times there's a human involved in that interaction. So I think the idea that AI is going to help you get the message exactly right, that's like unicorns and rainbows type of thinking. It's not exactly going to work that way. You still have to make that connection with the person. You still have to pull that story through. So I think that idea of we can get the perfect message down and our marketing is going to be done, we think is just missing a huge part of the equation. And when we talk about the frontline teams and kind of their perspective, if people acknowledge that their frontline teams are an important part of the equation, an important representative of their brand, an important messenger of their story, then hearing from them and understanding what their perception is really important, because what they perceive is what they're going to project on the customer. And in the case of those yellowtail representatives, if they were bought into that story and they were bought into the wine, what they project onto the customer is going to be much more compelling than if they don't agree with it, they think it's garbage. So I think if you acknowledge that the frontline or the customer facing team members or associates or ambassadors are an important part of the equation, listening to them and understanding how they see the world is critical to understanding what your customers are going to hear.
One of the things I always recommend leaders do is have story strategy sessions with different departments. And two questions that are so important to ask is, what is exciting our customers right now, and what's causing fear within our customers right now? And those two questions spur on so many problem solution conversations. And it really allows leaders to understand, okay, here's what's happening. Here's what's causing fear, anxiety. Here's what's exciting them to achieve what they want to achieve. There's a lot of stories that come out of that. So outside of story strategy sessions, what are some other practical steps that leaders can make to have a better connection with frontline workers?
Yeah, it's one word: listen. Right. And do it in a structured way. And that's where, our team at InnerView developed a platform called InFront, which is it's a platform that allows you to take what you just said and collect that information on a regular basis, be finding the things that what aspects of your story do your people gravitate to? Which aspects do they think you're lacking in? How do they think you stack up against the competition? It's sort of a scaled up way of asking what you just described. And I think that to have that at your fingertips and to have that, it's just another input. We say we don't think that we've invented the best thing since sliced bread, but what we have is there's a lot of dots you need to connect as a leader. We've given you insights into one of the dots being your people and the people who serve your customers, and illuminate it in a way that you simply haven't had it before. So that comes back to ask and listen in a repeated, systematic way. and use that information to inform decisions. It doesn't mean you're going to take every piece of it and act on it immediately. And this is something we advise our clients on. But having the information, understanding what's happening out there in the trenches is critical to making sound decisions. Otherwise, you're making guesses, right? And we've asked leaders within, medium, large organizations, how are you getting this input right now? And they're basically saying hunches or anecdotal feedback. And hunches and anecdotal feedback, people say they're data driven, but a lot of times they're making decisions on hunches and anecdotal feedback. Scaling that up and doing it in a more concerted and intentional way is where we're seeing companies have success.
All right, so this is so important to unpack. So let's talk about this. I like the verbiage that you use, structured listening. That's more of like an intentionality behind it, right? You're setting up a time in your calendar. You're going to listen. You're going to get feedback. But let's talk about connecting some of these dots. Yep. So I think it's really important for people to recognize if you have the wrong dots that are being connected, it could be horrifying for you. So as everyone that listens to this show knows, I'm big on storytelling. Intentional strategic storytelling wins in so many capacities, but what if someone's sharing the wrong story? And what's amazing is I've seen leaders that see different trends, they see things going viral, and they think because it's culturally acceptable, I should share this story too, but it might not land with their audience. And how dangerous is this? I've mentioned before on this show, I talk a lot about ICP/C, ideal client persona / community. Mine is older Gen Xers and baby boomers. Most of my clients have children. Overwhelming amount of my clients have children. So I'd be a fool not to share stories of my kids with business themes intertwined. Most of them have advanced degrees. Most of them live in a certain part of the country, right? All these different dots help me share stories in a better way to connect with my audience. What are some other dots that leaders need to be aware of regarding the story strategy and brand alignment?
Oh man, how long are your episodes, Matt? I mean, I have a feeling we could go on for a while. So I'm going to give you an example. Okay, so from our InFront studies, one of the things that we see consistently is we ask a question about confidence. So if it's a new brand positioning that the company's rolling out, in most cases it's a new product. So companies rolling out a new product, and we want to get a sense of whether or not the front lines are aligned to the story. We talk about belief, confidence, and pride. We believe we can measure belief, confidence, and pride and share that back with the leaders. But what happens is we will ask a question about how confident you are, but we don't trust that question. We ask it on purpose. And the reason we ask it is to get a gauge on whether or not they're saying something, but in the background, it's not really true. So I'm going to give you an example. When we ask a confidence question, frontline people, typically, when it's a salesperson, typically, they're going to say, yeah, I'm confident. I'm a salesperson. I'm confident. And then what we also do, sort of the core of our studies, we do an alignment calculation. We ask leadership to do the assessment. We ask the front lines to do the assessment. And they take 8 minutes, by the way. When we talk about structured listening, it only takes 7 to 8 minutes to do these studies. We ask leadership their perspective. We ask the front lines their perspective. And what happens is we'll come back and we'll say, you and your front lines are 35% misaligned, 35% misaligned. And here's why. But 93% of them told us that they were either confident or extremely confident in delivering the story. So if you are confident and you are misaligned, what are you confident in? Right? I'm confident, I know exactly what I'm doing, but you are getting the key points of the value proposition. You're elevating things that aren't necessarily claims your company can make, or you're not focusing on the thing that is the true differentiation of your offering, then that's bad, right? Confident and wrong is the worst thing you can possibly be. So through the studies, by listening to the front lines, we're helping organizations see where they may be confident and wrong. Because I'd rather have people be unconfident and wrong than confident and wrong, because then they're out there and they feel like they're telling it confidently, but it's not going to land with their audience. So I think it's important to recognize that you've got to have that secondary check. You can't just go out and say confidence is good. It's got to be confident and right.
All right, so let's dive more into this confidence piece from an example perspective. So clearly, if you have someone that is C-suite, or maybe they're the founder of the organization, clearly they have a lot of ties. It's their baby, so to speak, and they are confident in what they're selling. So then you come in, you ask sales reps, hey, how confident are you with this product? Well, of course, back to what you said, of course, they're going to say, yeah, I'm confident. I'm excited about it. But then when you start peeling back the layers, you recognize they're not near as confident as what they may have led on to believe. So where would the disconnect be between someone, it's their organization, they're super passionate, of course, because they're doing everything they possibly can to keep it afloat, and maybe one of their sales reps that says they're confident, but they're not really as confident as they should be. Where's that disconnect?
Yeah, you got to know what to ask. I think you got to know what to ask. It's not typical, especially if we're talking about salespeople, really anybody, but it's not typical for a salesperson to say, "Yeah, I'm struggling with this," right? So I think that the key is you've got to ask it in the right way, and to just send out a survey monkey and say, "Hey, how do you feel about this?" And people say, "Great." That's where you get the struggle coming in. I think when you take the example of the founder, right? The founder has a story. To me, a lot of times what it comes down to is the differentiation, right? Anybody's going to tell you, especially in a business to business, but even in business to consumer, right? In business to consumer, it may be even harder to differentiate one service from another. I think the people need to be confident in the differentiator. They need to be confident in what makes us different and better, as opposed to just what are some things we're good at. Some things that we're good at might not be a differentiated story. The founder is going to be much more likely to say, no, this is why we're different. And when we do our measurement, we talk about providing leadership with a picture of a win zone. And we come back and say, here's where your people think you can win, right? These are the attributes. Here are the value points, the benefits that they think you can win on. And if those don't align with leadership, well, guess what? We have to fix it, right? In that instance, you have to fix it. We jokingly say that our InFront tool is it's like a myth buster on steroids. We can really get underneath where the perceptions are wrong and the myths are out there, and the leader can say, no. The other thing it can do is inform the leader that, you know what, I hadn't thought of it that way. Maybe that is an angle that we should be playing. So we can't just assume always that the founder leader is right. If you take the input from the front lines, alignment of the messaging can work both ways.
So one of the things you mentioned earlier was market research. So I'm imagining people in a room, they're unpacking elements of research, and there's no alignment with what's actually happening on the front line. It's almost horrifying for me to even hear the term market research based on one of my episodes that I did recently with a gentleman. His name's Craig Andrews, and he talked about the market research of New Coke and how the research was on point, but we know it was a disaster. And also the research regarding the ad, you mentioned Apple, the ad that was ran, I believe it was in 1984. It was a Super Bowl commercial, arguably one of the best Super Bowl commercials of all time. And the focus group, the market research, said that was a horrible commercial before it launched. But Steve Jobs said, no, it's going to connect with our audience. We're going to run it. So clearly, and this is not just those examples, as you know, there are boardrooms across the United States that there is bad market research coming in, and it could cause so much lost revenue. So can you speak to just the amount that is being lost based on bad market research?
Yeah, I think that I'm going to go back to where I started with the say-do gap. There is a say-do gap, right? You put people in a certain environment and you ask them questions, and they're going to provide you with, I'm not going to say they're not being truthful. They're just not in the environment, right? When I talk about getting the feedback from the front lines, they're in the moment of truth, right? They're at that connection point. They're in those interactions day in and day out. So they're getting that, we'll call it more real time, if you will, insight into what, how customers are going to behave. One thing I definitely don't want to do is market research is important, right? Customer research is important. And we actually think it's so important that what we do is the difference between what we do and what most organizations do is we actually use the same principles that you're collecting consumer information, and we apply that inside the organization, right? We're actually we're doing sentiment analysis. We're gathering frontline perceptions. You want to know what your customers think of your value proposition. We want to know what the people talking to your customers think of your value proposition. So from a methodology standpoint and things like that, there's a lot of good stuff. I think the challenge is, other than changing your messaging or changing your ad or things like that, honestly, I think what I hear from executives is I have so much information, but nothing to actually do with it, right? I have nothing to actually do with it. When you bring the frontline perspective in, it becomes more actionable. You can make tweaks, turn down, you can bust a myth, right? You can bust one myth that can drive to much better connections between your people and your customers with very simple fixes. You don't have to go change your entire advertising campaign. So I think it's to me, it's not so much about market research being wrong, it's about it being incomplete, right? It gives you one part of the equation, but there's other dots. When we talk about these dots, there's other dots that you need to understand to make sure your message gets to the customer effectively.
No, that's really good to recognize. I appreciate you sharing that. One of the things that came to my mind is I remember, years ago, my wife introduced me to the Undercover Boss show. I remember watching it for the first, couple shows with her, and it was just so hysterical to watch, right? Because you have someone who they think that they know their customer intimately, and then the employee that they're working with is showing, hey, here's the disconnect, here's what you need to do. So clearly everyone listening to this show can't go on Undercover Boss, but are there creative ways that you've seen outside of meetings, outside of what you mentioned regarding the structured listening? Are there other things creatively that individuals in decision-making seats can reach out to their customers? Not surveys, not that, but what would be another way that they could do this so they can kind of pull the curtain back to recognize, hey, here's the market research. How do we actually align this with what's happening?
I have an answer for it, but it's not an easy answer. Okay. It's, I think it's sort of taking the spirit of Undercover Boss, which I think is a great tie in here. There are organizations that mandate that people in their organization or certain people in certain leadership roles that they perform frontline roles a certain portion of the year, right? So there will be, I heard about an airline, I forget who it was, one of the better ones, I'm sure, that requires, and because they're not all great, that requires their people to spend 2 weeks out of the year on the phones, right? Taking reservation or change calls or something like that. I know that's not an easy thing to do, but if you want to inform people that are in marketing, customer experience, sales, leadership type roles, them doing it is key. But I will caution that's one thing I think you can do. Actually, go perform it, right? Go perform it. Actually, have to take the call. Actually, have to service the customer. I'll tell you what can be very unproductive. A day of write outs, half a day in the call center, right? The anecdotal, I got one piece of, you do not understand how many organizations, Matt, we have talked to. Every time I tell these stories, people laugh because it happens to them where marketing went and did a ride out with sales for a day. And they came back and they're like, we got this message all wrong, or we need a better demo. They rode with one rep and saw 3 customers, and they came back and they want to completely overhaul their marketing strategy, right? I would call that unproductive. I would call that sort of a flailing, right? You don't want to necessarily do that. I recommend there being some structure to it, and whether that is through the listening, which I think is key, but also having your people go out and not just shadow, but really walk a mile in your people's shoes and do that in a structured way, I think can pay big dividends.
Oh, that is gold, what you're saying, because imagine a restaurant and they find out the health department's going to be coming out on a certain day. Of course, they're going to make sure that everything is cleaned up and everything. Of course, the fear is that someone walks in at that moment that things shouldn't be happening the way that they are, right? So back to your point about the ride-alongs, how much of that, and I hate to say this because it's going to sound just terrible, but how many of it is just kind of fake in a way that people are putting their best foot forward. Clearly they don't want to get in trouble. The boss is in the car, so they're going to say the right things. They're going to go to the best customers. What you said about actually taking on a role for a couple weeks or even a day, how much more are they going to be able to experience what's happening than a ride along? So I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, so I have a couple of points there. Let's take your Undercover Boss example. How does every Undercover Boss episode end? Right? Anybody that's ever seen the movie Jerry Maguire, there was the joke in there that On Oprah, everybody cries at the end, right? Everybody knows how the episode of Undercover Boss is going to end. It's going to end with this realization of how hard their people work. It ends up with, the boss really like, I need to serve these people better. And I think that's the thread I want to pull on here. This idea of doing it from a position of being a servant as opposed to being a top down, command and control leader. And to me, it really is about who you're doing it for. Okay. We just signed on a new client in a new industry for us. And the industry, one of the standards in the industry is there are companies that they're ride out companies. They send people to do ride outs with reps, and they've probably made a gajillion dollars over the years sending people on ride outs with reps. But what I would say back to this organization is, who do you do that for? You don't do that for your reps. You don't do that to make your reps better. You don't do that to serve them better. You do that to check a box. You do it to audit them. You do it so you can confirm some of your hunches. You don't do it for them. So I think when you think about how organizations can embrace this and really get the most out of it, I think that those efforts have to be about, and they have to be delivered in a way. We talk about write-outs. You have to deliver we need the feedback from you for you, not for us, right? This is so we can serve you better, so we can understand you better, so we can put you in position to succeed. All anybody that deals directly with customers wants is happy customers. That's all they want. They just want to be put in a position to serve their customers and make them happy. And we look at it as, if you frame it up the right way and you put out a mechanism that allows for that feedback to happen, it's going to flow. It's going to build trust. They're going to want to provide that feedback. Hiring a company to send them out to do write-outs is about you. So before you do anything, ask yourself, who am I doing this for myself or for my reps or my frontline teams? If it's about you, you're better off skipping it.
Oh, that is so good. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for everything you shared in this conversation. I really appreciate it. I got a lot out of it, but there's 3 takeaways in particular that I want to focus on that I appreciate you saying. I really appreciate you setting the expectation regarding marketing teams. I think a lot of C-suite leaders miss this, right? They think marketing can create the perfect message, and they're not able to do that. Marketing is the peak interest. So I appreciate you setting that expectation. That's really important for leaders to hear. The second piece is I really appreciate the verbiage of structured listening. And you had mentioned it doesn't take long. This is a way to connect the dots based on structured listening. I think that's fascinating. And then the third and final piece is I appreciate the words you mentioned: belief, confidence, and pride. And when confidence is wrong, high confidence, but it's wrong, it could spell disaster. So I appreciate you mentioning the importance of asking those questions, tying it together. So, Chris, if someone wants to get more information on you or what you do and they want to reach out to you for your services, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
Well, I'll start with me. The best place is very active on LinkedIn, as I know you are, Matt. So Chris Wallace, not an uncommon name. So you might have to dig a little bit, but like Matt, I'm in the greater Philadelphia area. So look for Chris Wallace in the greater Philadelphia area with InnerView. And then otherwise, when we talk about the structured listening, our structured listening tool is InFront. So infrontinsights.com is the website for that. Based on our conversation today, that'd be I think the best place for people to go and check out. We do have an ebook that talks about how you can set up a Frontline Insights program to get that structured listening going.
Perfect. I will put your LinkedIn in the show notes as well as that site. People can just click and go. But Chris, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Matt, it's really been a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.